Hello, it is Thursday, August 22nd. I am Andy Behrens. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. As our good friend Matt Harmon would say, it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And joining me to do it today, it's Sal Vetri. It is fantasy football thought leader, fantasy football influencer, Sal Vetri. Sal, how are you?
What's going on, Andy? It's a good day to be here. It's actually the perfect day to be here because I have my first serious draft tonight. So I brought a list of sleepers that we'll be talking about today. There's a list here, but I'm selfishly also on here to try and hear some of the things you're going to say and maybe bring that with me into the draft streets tonight.
So this could be a little bit of misdirection from you today. You ever engage in that little bit of light misdirection where you tout a sleeper that you're not really into because you know that everybody in the league that you're about to draft is
now me personally, I would never.
In what you have to say.
Me personally, I would never do that. I've been. There's been claims that I've done that by many of people, but no, I would personally never do
it. I'm not going to say that I've never done it. Well, you know, the thing that I will do actually sometimes, and this comes up more often during baseball season, I will make make the ad before I tout the player on social, right? Like it's probably not the sequence that people are looking for, but I will definitely make the ad in all of my personal leagues before I say anything on social or before I write anything.
You got to play the game. You got to play the game.
Yeah, you got to play the game. We're all out here playing the game. Listen, one thing that I should get to before, and Sal teased it, we're gonna talk some sleepers today. That's a fraught term. We're gonna talk some sleepers today. It's convictions week and all that. But I want to let you know that the fantasy mailbag is open for business for the rest of August. At the end of every show, including today's show, we will be answering the pressing questions that you have heading into your most important drafts. You can tweet at us. We'll be sure to tweet out at the beginning of each week a reminder, but you will get bumped to the front of the line by submitting your questions via voice memo or video. We are begging for your videos. Please do it to fantasymailbag@yahoosports.com. Our goal is to get to as many of your questions as possible. All right. We are continuing Convictions Week. That should have a theme song, by the way. I'm not going to attempt to sing it, but Convictions Week should definitely have a theme song. And our goal today is to identify some top sleepers for 2024. Obviously, goes without saying, it is massively important, perhaps more important, to nail your first round pick, your second round pick, your third, your fourth. Get the top of the draft right. Get some rock solid names at the top of the draft. I'm not saying you can overlook that. But then you also want to take big swings later. And you want to get some guys, think of Raheem Mostert last year, who was often drafted. Think of, any number of think of CJ Stroud, Jordan Love, any number of players who really popped last year. Perhaps you're thinking of a Sam Laporta, who was for many a sleeper, not for all. This is why I actually hate using the term sleeper. I don't know how you feel about this, Sal, but like when you use it, whatever. It's a clicky term. It's a searchable term. There are reasons that we have to use the term sleeper, but you always find people on your social feed who are like, dude, bro, I had that guy in Devi back in 2018. He's not a sleeper. I get it. Like your league context is everything. The way that you define a sleeper is going to depend on, whether it's a 16 team league with 9 flex spots or whether it's, just a standard hometown 10 team league. I don't know how you feel about this term, Sal.
Yeah, I think it depends on where we're addressing it. If it's Twitter, yeah, you're going to have to find somebody in high school right now for it to be a great sleeper for the Twitter streets. But for most people, the people I'll be drafting with in one of my home leagues tonight, they just got back into this maybe 3 days ago. So anybody that's brand new to the league, even if they're entering their third season, they've probably forgot the guy's name by now. I think sleeper's still a fair term.
Yeah, this is the thing, right? There's some of us who have been drafting and mock drafting and best balling since like May. But that is a very small percentage of the fantasy audience. Most people are exactly what Sal just described, where they're like waking up to football when we get through like the second and third preseason games, and they're still buying draft magazines, and they're just reacquainting themselves with the player pool. So some of the names we're going to be talking about today are probably repackaged breakouts. They're people that we've been talking about maybe for a few months, but the audience renews itself all the time. So we're going to get to the sleepers. Normally, the way I like to do these things is secret lists of sleepers, breakouts, whatever. But Sal is super prepared, hyper prepared. So he's got a bunch of names in the document already. And unfortunately, I can see some of his sleepers. So I might pretend to be surprised, but I am not actually surprised. Let's get into it. Sal, give me. It doesn't have to be your top sleeper. You can build to the top sleeper if you like. But give me a sleeper you're excited about for 2024.
Yeah, definitely. Let's build to that. I'll start with the Bills rookie wide receiver, Keon Coleman, their second round pick. And I think a lot of us got off on the wrong foot with Keon Coleman. If you want to take it back to the draft prep, he was sort of this hot or cold prospect. People didn't really like him with the same vigor as the top 5 wide receivers in the draft. So there's already this bias of, maybe not Keon Coleman. Then the Bills in the draft, they trade back a couple of times. The Chiefs, who take a wide receiver. The Panthers end up taking a wide receiver, and there's some skepticism around what the Bills are doing now. Will their offense regress? I think we got off on the wrong foot. We have to reintroduce ourselves now to this new version of Keon Coleman, the potential number 1 receiver for the Bills, been on the field every single snap with the starting unit, according to PFF, in the preseason so far. And this offense for Buffalo, I think a lot of people think it'll take a step back. You have Stephon Diggs gone. Gabe Davis, for what it's worth, is also gone. A new receiving core coming in. But right now, Vegas has them as the 6th shortest odds to lead the NFL in scoring. So I don't think they'll take a step back. Still have Josh Allen, still have a quality to good offensive line. And Keon Coleman could be, if not the number 1, probably a top 2 receiver in this offense.
I want this for him so much. I can't even begin to tell you. Like he was such a revelation just in the early press conferences, right? Like right. It would be so fun and so good for the NFL if this guy can just be like a semi-star. He doesn't have to be Stephon Diggs. He doesn't have to be like, multiple time all pro. But this is a really fun human being, and I very much want this to be right. I'm actually gonna. Instead of asking my typical probing question about the player that you led with, I'm actually going to go right into one of my sleepers because it's another Bills receiver, and I want to emphasize the fact that more than one player from this offense can pop. I'm going to talk about Khalil Shakir. But here's the thing, and listen, if you've been listening to Convictions Week, you've already heard me talk about Dalton Kincaid too. Like we've talked about a bunch of Bills, but here's the thing. There's over 240 vacated targets in this offense, right? Between Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs. Like there is a lot of opportunity to go around, and we can get a full beefy workload for Keon Coleman and still get a bunch of extra work for Kincaid and still get a bunch of extra work for Shakir and still feed Curtis Samuel when he's healthy, right? Like there's a lot of opportunity available here. And we're talking about one of Earth's best quarterbacks in just a great offensive environment. So you shouldn't feel as if, there can only be one right answer in the Bills offense because this is a receiving core that's kind of reinventing itself. Now, specific to Shakir, last year, the guy caught 39 of 46 targets, which is pretty ridiculous for a wide receiver. That's like a ratio that you might see for a running back. And he's not like some big downfield target. It was a relatively low ADOT, but this is also somebody who got a lot of yards after the catch, and that's a tribute to him. It's a tribute to Josh Allen. It's always a bit of a combo of the quarterback and receiver when we see somebody piling up yards after catch like that. But he converts 46 targets into 611 yards. Fun fact about him is that he actually led all qualified wide receivers in passer rating when targeted last year. It was 133.6. So a pass to Khalil Shakir last year was one of the most productive things that any offense did at any time. Finished the year strong. I like everything about this guy's setup. And again, we have over 240 vacated targets here, so we can accommodate breakouts for multiple Bills receivers. Sal, where are you? Like, where do you have these two guys in your ranks? First of all, which one are you more proactively reaching for, and how do you sort out the Bills receiving core generally?
Yeah, so I'm above the market on both guys in my rankings. I have Keon Coleman higher right now as the number 1 Bills receiver. I did have Curtis Samuel, so with the news that Samuel's week to week, should definitely bring that up. That did move these guys up even more slightly, a couple of spots in the rankings, 2-3 spots. So Keon Coleman's a guy, but like you were saying, so many vacated targets. And another point to bring up is that Ken Dorsey was fired mid-season last year. Joe Brady did not have an entire offseason to kind of get the offense he wants to roll with. and get all the personnel that he kind of wants to roll with, bringing in Curtis Samuel, having some input in what's going on in the draft, getting Coleman. So I think that's actually going to matter a lot more than people maybe are accounting for. And Josh Allen is going in the second round of fantasy drafts, maybe the third round. If Dalton Kincaid in round 5 or 6 is the only Bills pass catcher in the first 10 rounds, something seems off if we think Josh Allen's going to have another big year.
Man, that's such a good point. And it's one of the things that I like to harp on occasionally in fantasy is like when we have these real disconnects between where the quarterback is ranked and what we're doing with all the receivers, you know, there's an opportunity there, right? And usually it's the other way. Usually, you know, you find these situations where like we're really high on a bunch, Jared Goff's a pretty good example, right? We've got Amon-Ra St. Brown in the first round. We've got Sam Laporta as the tight end 1. We like Jahmyr Gibbs because he's, you know, such a receiving option in that offense. And yet Jared Goff is kind of buried in the ranks. But this is the opposite scenario, right? We're not like, nobody's quite sure what to do with any of the receivers, but we love Josh Allen. And obviously a little bit of that is the rushing upside, but you can't be the QB1 on rushing upside alone. You've got to also find a way to get to like 4,400 passing yards, which he does. So yeah, it's such a good point that if we're right about Josh Allen, multiple Bills receivers are definitely going to have to pop for us. All right, give me your second sleeper for this list.
Second sleeper. Let's go to the running back position, round 13, 14, depending on the draft you're in. And I want to talk about Ty Chandler, the Minnesota Vikings. This is a roller coaster. And I think we're at the point with Ty Chandler where it's going back up, ready for that exciting drop. So here's the thing with Chandler. He starts last year as sort of this, breakout potential candidate, only Alexander Mattison in front of him. Team trades and picks up Cam Akers. Okay, it's kind of halted. But in week 10, when Cam Akers goes down, you see Chandler finishes a top 30 back, so a flex option, a running back 2 for you, in 50% of the final 6 weeks, including a week where he got a start and had over 150 yards against the Bengals. So you're up high on that roller coaster. Alexander Mattison gets cut. It's looking good again. And then the team signs Aaron Jones a day after he's cut, the morning after the Packers cut him. So now we're in this spot where, okay, Ty Chandler goes again from this exciting breakout to, Aaron Jones is now there. And Jones is a good player, averaged over 5 yards per touch last year. Had a great postseason for the Packers when he was available. He was on the injury report for half the weeks. He missed 6 games. He's approaching 30 years old, and his explosive run rate, that's runs at 10 plus yards, and his broken tackle rate were at career lows last year. You usually don't come back as you approach 30 years old. So I think we're in a situation where Ty Chandler, who was explosive last year, he averaged himself as well as Jones, 5 yards per touch, could be seeing 45-50% of the snaps right away week 1. They've said great things about him last year. They've said great things about him entering this season. And it kind of brings me to this spot where you look at the draft, you see a situation in Tennessee. The Titans have a 7th round pick in fantasy in Tony Pollard and a 9th round pick in Tajay Spears. I view this backfield pretty similarly when you have Aaron Jones going in around 6 or 7, but you have Ty Chandler going in around 13 or 14. I think he's the discount version of a Tajay Spears, maybe even a discount version of like a Jaylen Warren.
Yeah, it's a good way to frame it. I wish I could push back a little bit on this, but I love this call. I think Ty Chandler is like a final round pick in a hometown league, can really pay dividends. There's no way they're like the highest and best use for Aaron Jones it simply cannot be like, 23, 25 touches per game. You're not going to get through a full season of Aaron Jones at that sort of workload. So I think there's an immediate opportunity for Ty Chandler there. I think that's a really good call. And you're right. We have way too big a gap between those two. I'll stick at running back for my second sleeper, and I'm going to go, and this is, I've talked about this guy a couple times on a couple of different platforms, and it's really like a sly way to fade Rachaad White is what's going on here. I'm pretty interested in Bucky Irving. He enters the season, he's kind of claimed the number 2 spot on the depth chart for Tampa Bay behind White. And White had a nice fantasy year, right? Like it was fine. It was a good yardage total, basically a full workload guy. He was not overly impressive as a rusher, I will say. And not that yards per carry is everything, but it was like 3.6 yards per carry. Not much after contact either. Like Rachaad White was not exactly among your leaders in yards after contact per attempt. He was about 2.5 for the season, according to PFF. And then but it was his work as a receiver pretty much that made him fantasy relevant. And that's not nothing. I like Rachaad White well enough. He's not buried in my ranks or anything like that, but he is exactly the type of running back, in my opinion, that a team can fall out of love with. And they can fall in love pretty easily with somebody who really pops in the preseason and does everything asked of them. And Bucky Irving has been, while not, I won't actually classify like his preseason as like loaded with highlights, but it's a lot of for a smaller back. It's a lot of impressive downhill running, a lot of impressive work between the tackles. I think he's been really good. He had a short yardage TD in the first preseason game. He's also a super accomplished college player, coming off back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons at Oregon. And I think the most exciting thing, and the thing that makes him such a plausible replacement for White. I'm not trying to move Rashad White out of his job necessarily. I'm just trying to find space for Bucky Irving. He caught 87 balls over the last 2 years. He caught 56 passes last year. And I think people know that, like, Oregon's offense was a lot of near the line of scrimmage pass attempts. And man, he was really good in that game. I don't necessarily think that Bucky Irving is taking over a full workload here, but I would be a little bit surprised if we don't see him at least as a rotational runner to open the season. I don't know, Sal, where are you on White this year? Where are you on this backfield?
Yeah, I am definitely concerned in terms of the coaching change for Dave Canales. Love to ride just basically Mike Evans and Rashad White last year. Throughout the entire season, he was giving a lot of props to Rashad White. You mentioned him not being as efficient in terms of yards per carry. The offensive line wasn't great last year. They are hoping it's improved this year with an addition to Graham Barton. How much will it be improved? We'll see on that. I think the biggest bonus or maybe favoring spot for Bucky Irving is they drafted him and that was it. Like, there's no other free agents coming in here to try and compete with him. Chase Edmonds has been there, really not done too much while there. They're saying now maybe a roster bubble cut candidate. He's like the biggest competition Bucky Irving currently has in that backfield for the RB2 job. So in terms of like a 4th-round rookie right away hitting the ground and running, it's a good situation for him.
All right, we're going to take our first break, and then we're going to come back with a few more sleepers. All right, Sal, we're back. Give me sleeper number 3.
Sleeper number 3 takes us back to the wide receiver position. And I'm almost hesitant saying this name, but these last couple of weeks I've gained a little bit more confidence. And it's Josh Palmer in round 13 of drafts, the Chargers wide receiver. Here's the thing. This entire Chargers offense is brand new besides Josh Palmer. I mean, you're talking coaching staff, you're talking receivers, tight ends, running backs. Everybody's brand new, even pieces of their offensive line. Palmer's been there for 3 years, has a connection with Justin Herbert. And the reason why I think that that's important is Herbert hasn't been in practice the last 2 or 3 weeks. He returned in a limited fashion 2 days ago, but he hasn't been getting that connection with these new guys in the offense. He has experience with Palmer, who has started 11 games these last 3 years when Keenan Allen has missed, averaged 12.5 fantasy points per game in those contests, pretty good numbers, while also competing with Austin Eckler in the target share, Mike Williams. Doesn't have those guys now entering the season. So I think Josh Palmer is an interesting player if he was, say, a 9th or a 10th round pick. Going in the 13th round, he has a chance to be this team's number 1 receiver, competing with a rookie in Ladd McConkey as probably his biggest competition right now.
Yeah, this is pretty fair. And, when all of us talk about the Chargers offense, basically, everybody gives a little bit of a nod to Ladd McConkey as a rookie who's a potential wide receiver 1 for his team. I don't know of anybody who's terribly enthusiastic about the Chargers passing game generally, right? I'm terrified of what a Harbaugh-Greg Roman collaboration is going to look like. We've often seen Greg Roman offenses finish dead last in the league in terms of pass attempts. But I don't necessarily love Justin Herbert for fantasy this season, but I think the world of his arm talent, and it is kind of hard to imagine that no Justin Herbert wide receiver is going to finish inside like the top 30, right? Somebody will. And I think Palmer might actually be the most plausible candidate for that. Like, I like McConkey. I like everything that we saw on film from him. And I think he's a really interesting talent, but Palmer's a pro and a pretty good pro. And is he super dynamic, electric, game-changing wide receiver? I don't know that he's that, but he's been a really effective and really efficient pro. And he's like the one guy here that is clearly a circle of trust player for Justin Herbert. And that has to matter at some point, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the situation with Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh is pushing down Josh Palmer outside of just not having a big name already in fantasy. But those two were together with the 49ers years ago. They had these wide receivers put up pretty good target seasons. If you include the postseason, Michael Crabtree, in 2012, 146 targets.
Mm-hmm.
Anquan Boldin in 2013, 150 targets. And in 2014, both those guys had over 100 targets. So that was 10 years ago. The NFL has only become more pass happy. That was without Justin Herbert, who I would say is a better quarterback passing wise than a Colin Kaepernick that they had with the 49ers. So I think this is an interesting spot for like minimum 100, maybe 120 plus targets for Josh Palmer. And in round 13, assuming you have a decent catch rate on that, he's going to pay off.
That's a really good way to frame it. He's probably the sneakiest candidate for like 100 to 120 targets in the entire game. I think that's fair to say. I'm going to go with a guy who I think can find his way to 100 targets and is also tied to perhaps a questionable passing offense. I'm going to go with Rashid Shaheed. Last year, I mean, I think people know at this point in his career exactly what he is. He's been a bit of a big play specialist, right? Average depth of target last year, 14.6. His passer rating, and this is a little bit fraught too, because we're talking about a guy who's attached to Derek Carr, and that's not ideal. But Shaheed's passer rating when targeted on deep balls was 121.5. Like, one of the best things the Saints did last year was throw it deep to Rashid Shaheed. He's been, from the moment he entered the picture for New Orleans a couple of years ago, he has been a clear dynamic playmaker. The only significant move that this team really made at wide receiver in the offseason was to part ways with Michael Thomas. So we know that there are a few additional targets available. Shaheed, if we get a full season, and that's been a little bit of a thing in his first 2 years, but if we get a full season, I think he should see 100 opportunities this year. They will be, high yield downfield opportunities. And sometimes that makes a guy a high variance roller coaster of a receiver. And that's not for everyone. I get it. So maybe this is one of those players that falls into the category of, we really like him in best ball. We don't know when to start him in managed season long leagues, but man, most wide receivers are actually a little bit like that. Like, the only super consistent high level wide receivers that you're going to get are the guys that you're drafting in the first and second round. And basically everyone else is a little bit of a carnival ride. And Shaheed happens to be one of those guys where, like, the big weeks can actually win you a matchup. He's not somebody who's going to swing between like 30 receiving yards and 90 receiving yards. He's going to have some of those 30 receiving yard games, and then he's going to hit you with like 3 catches for 150 and 2 touchdowns. And that is the kind of player who will win matchups. And so I always like to have, whether it's a deeper league flex position, whether it's a wide receiver 3 spot, I like to have a guy like that on the roster. It's not for everyone, but I'm particularly interested in Shaheed. You think that's crazy to target a Saints receiver who isn't Chris Olave?
No, I'm like well above the market on Shaheed, probably more than any other Saints player. Maybe Juwan Johnson's close, but the thing that I like with Shaheed, I'm terrified of this offense a lot because of the offensive line. You could say what you want about Derek Carr, but under pressure, it hasn't looked pretty. But that might work in the favor of Rashid Shaheed if his role does change this year from just a downfield option to still having those pieces of his game, but maybe Clint Kubiak coming over, take some things from the 49ers, middle of the field receivers, yards after the catch. Because if that's the case, if that comes over just a little bit, and the offensive line isn't as good as we probably think it won't be, then you're going to see a lot of short passes to Shaheed, and that's where those receptions can go up for half PPR, and yards after the catch.
Yeah, you've kind of just given us the scenario that would actually unlock the potential for like a wide receiver 2 season for Shaheed, right? If and I don't want to I don't even want to speak it into the world necessarily, because I don't know that it's what they'll do with Shaheed, but man, if he got some layup targets, like if he just got some of the, I don't expect him to run a lot of the Michael Thomas routes, just like the quick slants, easy button stuff. But if he did, that would be really exciting, and we would have some real yards after catch opportunities and some big play opportunities, and it would open up Shaheed as like a plausible, PPR asset as well. All right, give me your 4th sleeper for this list.
Yeah, I want to go to the quarterback position here. Usually I'm trying to secure my quarterback by like round 9 or 10, where Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams are going. And then I'm kind of checking out. Like, I need to get a guy by then. But these last couple of weeks in best ball and mock drafts, I'm seeing Trevor Lawrence fall late into round 10, into round 11 pretty often these days. And that just seems too late. We kind of touched on this earlier, but his pass catchers, Christian Kirk goes in like round 6 or 7. Evan Ingram, round 6. Even Brian Thomas, the rookie's pushing towards round 10 now. If all these guys are going earlier, Trevor Lawrence probably has to have a good year to sustain that. And not to mention something that kind of goes under the radar, this division might have just the group of worst secondaries. You look at the Colts, you look at the Titans, pretty bad. The Texans are probably the best secondary, but like middle of the pack on paper entering the year, definitely some young talent. And then the Jaguars themselves might have a bottom 3 secondary. I think there's just going to be a lot of passing success in this division. And you get to face those teams 6 times this year. Trevor Lawrence also has sneaky rushing upside. Last year, he was a guy who was playing with an ankle sprain at one point during the season and still finished top 10 in quarterback rushing, still had 4 rushing touchdowns. He's 220 pounds, a huge frame. Around the red zone, you probably get a couple extra TDs.
I love this call. And this is another one of those situations where if you've been listening during Convictions Week, you know that I'm on Trevor Lawrence. And one of the appealing things is that like almost anybody who had him on a roster last year was super unsatisfied with the season they got from Lawrence. And they're probably out on him this year. So there's less competition. I felt a little weird discussing him in the Breakout Players podcast because I mean the guy's been on the national radar forever. We can certainly say that he broke out in the NFL a couple years ago when he led his team to a playoff win. It was a great season, like clearly an ascending talent. Last year, a step back. There were so many plays, and I don't need to remind people of this. There were so many plays that were either drops or like bobbled catches or 1 foot inbounds, 1 foot out of it, like the collegiate touchdowns. His season was so full of that. I mean, he could have had 30 touchdown passes last year. He's still got the huge arm. I love Brian Thomas. That was just a spectacular addition. If you want to talk about a player who pairs perfectly with what Trevor Lawrence has inarguably done well, which is, get deep, huge arm, throw the deep ball. Like that is Brian Thomas's game. That is definitely Trevor Lawrence's game. So I just think they have a really nice complementary set of receivers. And he is set up for pretty obvious success. And there's sneaky rushing upside with Trevor Lawrence too. It was one of the best parts of his game as a collegiate player. And the one other thing that I like to remind people with Lawrence, he's only he's really young. He's still, as we speak, he's still 24 years old. He is 1 year older than Jaden Daniels. So we are nowhere near, at least in theory, what peak Trevor Lawrence is going to be. We don't have to I know he's been in the league for a little while. We can toss out that first year because of the disastrous coaching situation, but still a really young player who is still learning the league, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think that when we just look at Lawrence, hasn't had a top 10 quarterback finish yet. So like you were saying earlier, he's kind of let some people down in the past. And now he enters this year without Calvin Ridley. I think a lot of people see these things as negatives, but Calvin Ridley in this offense was kind of miscasted for a lot of the year last year. Brian Thomas, maybe coming into that similar type of a role, is the complete receiver you want in that role. He just ran by defensive backs in college. Won't be the same in the NFL. We'll have to add a little bit more nuance, but there's going to be those plays. Even if he only sees 90 to 100 targets this year, even less than that, if a good amount of them are, let's say, top 10 in 20-plus yard targets per game for Brian Thomas, that's going to pay off a guy who goes in round 11, and that's going to help Trevor Lawrence as well, who goes in a similar part. That's a pretty good just stacking combo there to get a quarterback and a wide receiver late with a ton of upside.
Yeah, it's super attainable too. It's one of those pairings that's really easy to put together in any fantasy league. All right, I'm gonna go a little deeper at quarterback, and I want to be clear that I am not recommending this guy for your 10-team 1 quarterback league. Okay, I think you can go ahead and leave Will Levis undrafted in formats like that. But if you play in a super flex, if you play in I've got a 16-team draft coming up, I'm interested in Will Levis, and there's not a whole lot from his rookie year outside of 1 game that I can point to tell you, this kid has all kinds of potential, right? It was the one big game in which he basically threw half of his touchdown passes last year. He actually finished with fewer than 200 yards in 5 of his 9 starts. I'm not trying to dress up his rookie season as if it was, just an unqualified success. It wasn't. Took too many sacks. There were issues. What I do like about his situation is this is another example of a team that just really they did all they could in the offseason. You saw Carolina do this too. There's this was a constant theme. You saw the Bears do it in advance of drafting Caleb Williams. They've built things up around Will Levis in a really positive way. This is where Calvin Ridley lands. So the receiving core is better. You've got somebody who's basically in his prime. The offensive line, much better than it was last year. They at least threw resources at it. So we expect that to be improved. So there is reason for hope here. I don't I don't exactly know what the new offense is going to look like. It's a bit of a weird collaboration. We'll see how it goes. But I'm kind of a believer in Levis's talent. We don't have to worry about the arm. The arm is pretty huge. We saw that in the huge splash game with DeAndre Hopkins last year. He's not Trevor Lawrence necessarily as a rushing threat, but plenty of rushing touchdowns as a collegiate player. It's a little bit of his game. He's got a little sneaky, you can imagine a scenario in which Will Levis, when they get down on the goal line, in which Will Levis is maybe the primary option. So I can see a path to like 5 or 6 rushing scores. I think he can be kind of sneaky in Superflex, and I don't mind ending up with him. If I'm in any sort of format in which we're starting 2 quarterbacks, I don't actually hate landing him as my second QB. I don't know how you feel about him and that Titans offense.
Yeah, I think they've done everything they can to try and have him set up for success this year. You even bring in Tyler Boyd, a reliable slot receiver. You bring in trying to improve the offensive line. That'll probably be the biggest question for me. You get Lloyd Cushenberry, a center. That's pretty good, a veteran. Pick up J.C. Latham with a top 10 pick. If he can hit for you at the tackle position, I think now you're really cooking and you have everything you need for Levis. And then it just comes down to his play, which now having a full offseason to be the guy, not having Ryan Tannehill there, not going into the year with the mindset that you're the quarterback too, I think that's probably going to help a lot.
Yeah, offensive line's still a huge issue because we see one thing that we see all the time in the NFL is like, teams can throw resources at a position like that, at a unit like that, and it still takes a lot of time for an offensive line to gel, right? Like you can have some brand name linemen that you bring in and it still doesn't look great in the early months of the season. So if that's better, and I can't believe it's going to be worse, then we really have a nice setup for Levis. Give me your 5th and final sleeper.
Yeah, so I can go either tight end or running back is what I'm debating. I have a couple here, but I'll go with the tight end here. We haven't hit on a tight end position on my end. So I'm looking on Twitter. I'm seeing some stuff pop up. I know guys that I like at the tight end position. So I see the name Noah Fant a lot, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe this guy is going to be like an 11th to 12th round pick. Then I look in drafts as recent as yesterday. He's a 16th, 17th round pick still, undrafted in a lot of leagues. He's going 5 to 10 rounds after guys like Pat Freiermuth, David Njoku, and I honestly believe he has a similar upside in terms of targets and just playing time as those guys, which usually leads to fantasy production. Now, some people might say right away, get into the comment section, he was a tight end 38 last year. He had no touchdowns. What are you talking about? And yeah, I would agree with that, but the context matters. I mean, he was being rotated through with 2 other tight ends, Colby Parkinson and Will Dissly. They're gone. It was nothing to do with talent. It was more so the way that his offensive coordinator liked to use those tight ends. He's also gone, Shane Waldron, now in Chicago. A new offensive coordinator in town in Ryan Grubb. A lot of talk about him potentially coming in and running a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. He did that in college at Washington, had them being a top 5 offense in college football last year. So I think Noah Fant could go from being outside the top 30 wide receivers in route participation and snaps. You got to be on the field to score fantasy points, to maybe breaking into top 12, top 10 range. And if that's the case, he can finish as a top 10, top 15 tight end instead of the tight end 24 where he goes now. And just a reminder, he did have 2 top 12 seasons during his time with the Broncos to start his career. That was when he was a full-time player. He should be going back to that this year.
Yeah, as you may know, there's no greater way to pander to the host of this podcast than to hype an Iowa tight end. So I am appreciative. I think this is a great name to introduce. It's a tight end seems like a crowded position, and I don't know if Noah Fant is somebody that you're drafting again in like a 10-team league. You probably don't stash a bench tight end in a format like this, but a couple things that I'll just remind people of. Like, very few tight ends in the history of the combine and the history of pre-draft testing have tested as athletic as Noah Fant. Like, this is a rare athlete by NFL standards, at least when he came into the league. So huge talent there, no question about that. They paid him in the offseason too, at the same time that they let, as you mentioned, Dissly and Parkinson go. So and that in combination with a new offense that promises perhaps a little bit more passing volume, I'm super excited. I think this is a great name. I think it's a spectacular deep league name, and I've ended up in a number of leagues. Not surprisingly, I mean, it's never a surprise if I get an Iowa tight end, but I've ended up with Noah Fant quite a bit. I love that call. I'll give you, for my last sleeper, I'm going to go back to a tight end that I discussed at length in the tight end position preview podcast that we did a little while ago. I'm going to go to Isaiah Likely. And again, I just want to remind people that when Mark Andrews was absent at the end of last season, Isaiah Likely performed almost exactly like Mark Andrews. It was a huge run for him. Over his final 6 games, he caught 21 balls, 322 yards, 5 touchdowns, highlight plays. like some of the most electric plays that we saw from the Ravens offense involved Isaiah Likely. His passer rating when targeted last year, 147. So one of the best things that any NFL team did last year was throw the ball to Isaiah Likely. It was one of the best ideas in football. The preseason buzz has been pretty relentless to the point that I think we have to expect to see him on the field quite a bit more than we did last year. And I think it's also one of those situations where you just can't, like, you kind of, I don't know, toothpaste out of the tube or the genie out of the lamp or whatever metaphor you want to use. Like, I don't know that you can easily put it back in because he was great at the end of last season. So we have to see more of him. And then you have the upside here of, and I'm not, again, I'm not wishing an injury on anybody, but if anything happens to Mark Andrews, if Mark Andrews misses games, I'm going to have Isaiah Likely in my top 5 or top 6 tight ends, because when he's playing 80+% of the snaps and he's running routes on all those snaps, he's like, good things are going to happen. They happened routinely at the end of last season, and I would expect them to happen this year as well. How do you feel? Well, this doesn't even have to be about Likely. How do you sort out the Ravens receiving core generally?
Yeah, I'll put a closing note on Likely. 59 catches his final year in college at Coastal Carolina, 24% target share. And then he came into that first preseason, and I remember it was like one of the best preseasons a tight end has ever had, which make of that what you will. But whenever the dude's on the field, he's producing. The Ravens receiving core, it's based on like how drafts are going right now. Like Mark Andrews usually goes before Zay Flowers. That's the guy that if I want to target somebody, it's Mark Andrews. I view Mark Andrews with similar upside to like Kelsey and Sam Laporta, who go 20, 30 picks earlier in some drafts. And I'm looking at Mark Andrews like, this guy last year was just as good as those guys. There's no reason why entering this season with an Odell Beckham Jr. gone, with him still being the main option in the red zone in the passing game, at least for Lamar Jackson, that Andrews still can't finish as maybe the number 1 overall tight end. And I get to take him at like the end of the 4th round.
Yeah, it's a really good call. It's going to be a fun offense, and they've got some weapons. All right, we're going to head into a final break. When we return, we're going to dive into a special segment for you guys and then get into your pressing questions in the fantasy mailbag. Week 1, opening week of the fantasy season, is about 2 weeks away. And as you all know from the countless live reads on this podcast, we've got a little thing going with NBC Sports this year. If you sign up for a fantasy league on Yahoo Fantasy, you will automatically be entered to win $1 million. For additional entries into that contest, you need to start players who score a touchdown on any of NBC's 3 Week 1 games. Those games are Kansas City, Baltimore. That's a pretty good game. Philadelphia, Green Bay. Also a pretty good game. And LA, Detroit. Also a pretty good game involving fun offenses. So, Sal, let's give a little fantasy advice for these 3 games specifically. Give me a couple of stars that you would expect to score a touchdown in the NBC opening week games.
Yeah, so I look at this first game with Kansas City and Baltimore, and right away I'm like, okay, this has got to be the highest scoring game of the week. And you look at the Vegas totals, and it's 46.5 points, which is not nothing, but it's not top 5 even in the scoring points for the week in terms of team totals. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, what's the catch here? Maybe since it's week 1 and the Ravens have a top 5 secondary on paper entering the season, maybe the Chiefs offense isn't set up as we think it will be this season for a dynamic game. They might not be without Marquise Brown in the passing attack. It's Xavier Worthy's first game. Could be his coming out party, but against this secondary, might not be his coming out party. So I'm looking at the running backs, not only on the Chiefs and Isaiah Pacheco because of those things, but also on the opposite side of this with Derrick Henry in the best situation he could be in now with Lamar Jackson, some deception there with the quarterback run game. And I'm looking at both guys as the studs that I like to score in that game specifically, and on the entire week, honestly. They're my 2 favorite guys to target.
I love that pairing because I think actually that Pacheco and Henry, between those two, you've hit on one of them is going to lead the NFL in touchdowns. Like one of them is going to have like an 18 or 20 touchdown season. I feel like Pacheco is one of the most slept on players. Henry, not so slept on, but anyway, both of them great offensive environments and featured runners for their teams. I will take, you know what? I'm going to take David Montgomery. Because David Montgomery, in addition to piling up touchdowns last year, actually led all running backs in carries inside the 10 and inside the 5. I don't actually expect it to change that much. And I know that everybody's really excited about Jahmyr Gibbs. I'm excited about Jahmyr Gibbs. He's a really exciting player. But when when things go spectacularly well for a team in a particular area, I really expect them to veer away from it. And so I think we're still going to see plenty of David Montgomery at the goal line. We're going to see plenty of Gibbs too. It's a great offense. So you don't need to veer away from either of those guys. But I think Montgomery in any given week is probably the most likely Lions player to find the end zone. So I'll take him. I'm also going to take, Jalen Hurts, the guy who will probably again reach double-digit touchdowns for the Eagles. I don't know that the tush push will be executed flawlessly all of the time this year as it was last year, but you can pretty much get a yard or two anytime you want out of Jalen Hurts. And I expect plenty of points to be scored in that Eagles Green Bay game. So give me Hurts in that one. Okay, let's move away from the stars. Let's look, we've already talked sleepers on this show. Let's talk about a couple of sleepers each that you expect to score touchdowns again in the NBC Week 1 games.
Yeah, let's go to this Packers and Eagles game on Friday night in Brazil. I'm looking at a sleeper here on the Packers side of the ball. The entire offense, and that man's name, I won't bury the lead. It's going to be Tucker Kraft, the tight end. The entire offense in the passing game for the Packers, I like. Philadelphia, second worst secondary in coverage last year to end the season. They added some rookies, some young players, but they still have James Bradbury and Darius Slay, who are aging veterans, struggled towards the end of last year. I think Jordan Love in this offense, Matt LaFleur having extra time to prepare for week 1 in this defense, is going to have a field day. Tucker Kraft was one of the best tight ends in the entire NFL as a rookie last season, and he was in top 5 in terms of passer rating for tight ends when he was targeted by Love. Yes, Luke Musgrave is back and healthy. He's going to be out there, but Kraft's going to be on the field a lot. They need him in the run game. He'll be out there for play action. I like him as a sneaky option in that game to score. And I was going to pick Rashad Bateman, but I thought better. As another sneaky option here. I said, no, I've been touching this burner for far too long, and every time I touch it, it hurts. So I'm swapping, and I'm going to this Rams in Detroit game. I'm looking at this. It's highest point total on the week. So there's going to be touchdowns. So right there, my odds are better for my sleeper to score. I'm looking at the Lions side of the ball. Rams secondary, a lot of young players last year. Added a couple of veterans here and there in the offseason. Still doesn't look to be one of the better secondaries on paper. Jamison Williams. Jamison Williams is a guy who the last time we saw him in the NFC Championship, he scored twice. The next time we see him, he's going to score for us, and he's going to get us some winnings in this sweepstakes.
Oh, man. Okay. Well, you stole one of my sleepers, which is vicious. That is a vicious attack. I'm gonna piggyback on the Williams call. I think that's definitely happening. And I'm not one of the Jameson bros either. I'm not somebody who's been itching to see a fully operational, fully functional Jameson Williams. I haven't been making a whole bunch of promises about him. I think he's had some really ugly games so far in his NFL career. But I also think that the last time we saw him, that is legitimately within his range of outcomes any given week. I've mentioned it before. I think the fantasy community generally has been very disciplined on Williams last year. Sometimes we get in these Gabe Davis situations and we get the last taste that we get of a player is so good that we're like, oh man, this guy's a wide receiver too next year. We haven't done that with Williams so much. He's still buried in the ranks a little bit, but I think he is whatever else he is or isn't at this point. He is definitely an explosive playmaker, and I think they're going to scheme up some ways to make his touches perhaps not so difficult. And obviously, they've really been gassing him up. Dan Campbell's really been talking him up, and I'm a little bit of a believer. My other name here is going to be Romeo Doubs, just because he's just like the forgotten Packers receiver, right? Like we talk a lot about this receiving core and expectations for Christian Watson, and will he stay healthy? And what is the ceiling if he does? And how does Jaden Reed build on what he did last year? And man, they got a couple of good tight ends too. I think Doubs is just sort of quietly like a circle of trust receiver for Jordan Love. He's been a really good pro to this point. It's not like a noisy camp for him necessarily, but that guy is somebody that they get radar lock on when they get in the red zone. So I think Romeo Doubs always in any given week has a decent chance to score. And I would expect him to finish this season. Like if Jordan Love is the player that we think he is, I think Romeo Doubs can finish the year with 6, 8, 9 touchdowns. I think that's definitely a possibility. All right. We know for everyone listening to this pod that you are likely going to have your most important drafts in the next few weeks. They're probably coming up. For Sal, they're just beginning. And we're here to help. So welcome to the Fantasy Mailbag.
You've got mail.
When it comes, I want to
Goodbye.
All right, first question. This comes to us from Shannon. Shannon says, I have a, quote, just for fun league. I mean, they're all just for fun. They're all at least partially for fun. Some of them are for other things. This just for fun league will have 8, possibly 10 teams. After listening to the latest mock draft episode, I'm really leaning toward making it a super flex. Oh, good. My question to you is, what would be the best roster settings for an 8 to 10 team super flex league? First of all, I'll just say compliments on the choice, because Superflex doesn't fix everything, right? It doesn't fix all of the scoring problems that have kind of been around at the quarterback position from the beginning, but it at least gives a little bit of scarcity to it. Like we talk about this quite a bit in one quarterback leagues. Like there's no penalty for missing on a quarterback, right? Because there's always, last year it was Jordan Love, it was CJ Stroud. Every year there's like 2 to 4 guys who bubble up and become like real difference-making quarterbacks who can be had on the waiver wire early in the year. So there's never any scarcity to this position, but Superflex does that. If you're in a 10-team Superflex league, there's a pretty good chance that like 30 quarterbacks are going to be drafted. And that is going to mean that if you go to the waiver wire, all you're going to see there is like Gardner Minshew or Bryce Young. Like it's going to be tough. So Sal, what settings do you like to see in a Superflex?
I mean, I think the biggest change is just making it the Superflex League is kind of like the biggest roster setting specific you're going to do. But the rest kind of just stem from any other league. I like to see more roster spots, more regular flex spots paired with that. If you only had one flex spot and you added a Superflex, that's probably fine. It's probably fine for most leagues, but add a second flex spot. The one thing I will say is when you start to add a Superflex and you start to kind of get that feel of like, oh, I get to play another player, I get to have another guy on my team, maybe start to consider not adding extra bench spots, because I've been in some leagues where you have 9, 10 bench spots, and now the waiver wire every week isn't even fun. It's like not even part of the game. You're looking at third strings out there. If you're talking about quarterbacks at that point, you're looking at guys like I mentioned earlier in high school, literally like in college still. So that's probably the route that I would go. Consider maybe another flex spot, but super flex specifically, strategy-wise, you got to bump those quarterbacks up 2, 3+ rounds in drafts.
I love that answer. That's where I was going to go. One of my suggestions to people is always to limit the bench spots. It doesn't mean that you have the shortest possible bench. It certainly doesn't mean that you have like a 2-person bench, anything like that. But short benches force decisions. They force some difficult cuts, right? They set up a situation in which you can't just stash everyone, right? Like you can't just draft every backup running back in the hopes that by week 8 something will happen. No, you have to make tough choices. And I think we want that. I think we want a dynamic waiver wire that is full of interesting names. You're also going to find that if you have short benches, it encourages trading too. It just encourages transactions, and like that kind of roster turnover is really fun. That makes a fantasy league fun. So, and if you're a pretty competitive manager, it's going to help you. It's going to benefit you. So, I like that answer, and I like the question. I love seeing people move to Superflex. It is a better version of the game in my opinion. Okay, next question here comes to us from Sage. Sage says, what's up, Yahoo team? My name is Sage, and I'm an avid listener of the podcast. Thank you. And Sage follows Reception Perception every year, so good on you. I'm actually blind, and fantasy football has given me a way to stay competitive with my friends after I lost my vision. Man, that's like... we obviously have tried to build a game that is accessible to everyone. That is that is really amazing, and it's thank you for playing with us. Sage says the Yahoo app is extremely accessible for me to use, so naturally I'm addicted now. In a 10-team double flex keeper league where we keep players based off where we drafted them, I have Kyler in round 15 and Achane in round 16. Fortunately, drafting in the 4 spot. Assuming CMC and Bijan are gone, top RBs are Barkley, Williams, and Henry. Of the top receivers there, what do you guys think? I'm not sold on CD because of his situation. Thoughts? Also, Sage says, P.S. Ride or die, Del Don's takes. Yeah, they are some takes. So I'll start with you there. What do you do at 4 in a keeper league where a whole bunch of good players are gone?
Yeah, I guess the clarifier here is, does he think CeeDee Lamb is going to be there at 4 then? That's an opportunity based on what he was saying?
That's the way I read it, yeah.
So, I mean, if there's a chance that Lamb falls to 4, I would go with it. They're not going to enter the season without that contract getting settled. It's just not even built for CeeDee Lamb to do that in terms of what he'll be losing each week. He'll just suit up at that point. But let's assuming somebody in your league assume that they take him before them, and those running backs are the people that are left. And just to kind of give you an opportunity here, for me personally, at that point, I mean, all those guys are great options. Williams, Saquon, and Derrick Henry, I believe, were the options there. I'm personally going to honestly side with Derrick Henry there. He's one spot higher than Saquon Barkley in my rankings, projected for 10.5 rushing touchdowns this year. We talked about him a little bit earlier about just him being with Lamar Jackson. Even though he's 30 years old, he was still efficient in terms of yards created per touch last year, led the NFL in carries. Now he's going to be in this offense where Lamar Jackson runs the ball. Linebackers are going to have to pause whenever there's a handoff and potential handoff, and that's going to give Derrick Henry even more advantage in between the 20s and the red zone. So between those options, it's a slight lean for Henry because of those reasons over Saquon for me.
Yeah, I think you nailed this answer. That's how I feel too. First of all, if CD's there, I'm going to take CD. This stuff happens every year with players who hold out into camp. This rarely spills over into the regular season. I wouldn't expect it to in these situations. And yeah, there are some cases that you can point to where somebody had a little bit of rust in the opening weeks after returning from a holdout. But man, I mean, the Cowboys built their whole offense out of CeeDee Lamb last year, and I expect them to run it back with roughly the same approach. So I would take CD if available. I wouldn't really think twice about that. And then I like Derrick Henry as a pivot. I have the same sequence in my ranks as you do. I've got Henry above Saquon. I just have very few questions about what Henry's role is going to be in that offense. And I think Henry has a path to a huge touchdown total on the season. Okay, last mailbag question we're going to take. This is from Tristan. Tristan says, my draft is in a couple of weeks. We don't choose what order. The draft order is set. I assume I'm filling in some words here. Draft order is set right before we start the draft. So how do you plan for last minute picking? I have my guys that I am targeting, but I don't want to reach too much. So, Sal, in a draft where you don't know where you're going to pick, I don't know, maybe we're the wrong people to answer this question because we're probably both involved in so many drafts that I have drafted from every spot, and I'll have an approach at every spot. Do you have advice for people entering drafts where they don't know where they're going to pick?
Yeah, especially for this situation, you said you have 2 weeks, preparation. Preparation is what it is. Whether it's mock drafts, there's free mock drafts, there's some paid ones if you want people to not leave after the 5th round of the mock draft. And not only that, you could draft from every single slot if you want to for that, and just kind of see where you're at. And then also before your draft starts, minutes before, even an hour before, if you're going to get into the lobby at that point, just queue up all those guys you said. Have them already in a queue. Don't be on the clock and I wasn't expecting to pick 11th. I didn't know these guys would be on the board. Queue them all up so you have options there right away, and then spend these next 2 weeks preparing. Even if it's just 30 minutes a day, you do 1 or 2 quick mock drafts, and you kind of know who's on the board at what spot, depending on where you're drafting.
Yeah, I'll just say that if you draft in the first half of the first round, no worries, right? You're gonna get a running back or a receiver who could very plausibly finish top overall at their position. You're gonna feel set. One thing I like to think about if you happen to end up in the back half of the first round, I want to make sure that I'm not chasing at each position throughout the draft, right? Because the top 3 running backs are probably going to be gone. So I don't want to feel extra pressure to, oh man, hey, this great receiver is there, but man, I got to take a running back. Those 3 are gone. And then you're kind of chasing and you're behind everybody else. And you can fall into that habit at each position. I want to make sure if I'm in the back half of a draft that I have an edge somewhere. And that may not be at running back. That might mean that you're going to have to double tap receivers at the top. It might mean that I am more likely to be the manager who takes Josh Allen, to be the manager who takes either Laporta or Kelsey, right? I just want to make sure that at one of the key positions in fantasy, I still give myself an edge. I don't want to feel like I'm spending the entire draft chasing at each spot. Okay, just as a reminder, send in your questions to fantasymailbag@yahoosports.com. If we don't get to your questions right away, I promise we are keeping a folder. We hope to get to them eventually. Our goal, of course, is to get to as many of your questions as possible. And again, if you want to send in a video, a voice memo, we love that stuff. Please do it. All right, that is going to do it for us today. On Friday, we conclude Convictions Week, the best way I can imagine doing it, with Dalton Del Don, unrivaled master of the hot take. We are going to check on his most scorching takes. You're probably going to wear like protective lenses for this. You probably want to, make sure that you have heat shield technology around you. It's going to be something. Dalton never disappoints. Oh boy. Until then, for myself, Andy Behrens, for Sal Vetri, we are out.